So you're here for Brazilian different types of malware and why your organization should care. If you're looking for talk about the hair removal in sensitive areas, you're in the wrong talk. So, my name is Jared Peck. I'm a senior threat researcher at Proofpoint. Proofpoint, if you don't know, is an email security company, so that's where all of this data comes from. I've been in security and IT for over 11 years now. Proofpoint for about a year. CTI and SOC for a Fortune 500 financial for about 8 years, and in the trenches as a sysadmin for some small orgs before that. I'm a career changer. I was a firefighter paramedic for over 15 years. I've treated gunshot wounds, I've delivered babies, and then decided to get into something less stressful and got into IT security, so, you know. So at Proofpoint, I'm part of the field-facing threat research team, so I'm not in sales, but I get to talk to customers about threats and malware and threat actors and stuff like that. I get to do both talking to customers and the research, and that's where this comes from. I'm still in the graveyard that is Twitter a little bit, and I'm also on Mastodon with the same handle there. So we're going to talk briefly about some threat actor attribution. A lot of orgs don't look at it or don't consider it that much, but it's important for a lot of different ways here. So 2 different types of attribution. I have attribution with the capital A and attribution with the lowercase. So attribution with the capital A, almost nobody needs to do. That's for usually APT type activity. That's, we know who this is, we know who they work for. You know, if they come out of the country, we're going to either drone strike them or arrest them. So that's that type of attribution. The type of attribution that most organizations need to do is know what methods are being used by these threat actors to attack them, and you know, what they can do to prevent it. So most of this is kind of story time because this came out of my research, so hopefully this is a little more entertaining than some of the talks that you've seen today. So really, what do we need for attribution? We really need patterns. So coming from a medical background, I like to use this example a lot. You know, a normal heartbeat there is on the left. You know, it has a pattern that it follows. Anything that's different is bad. And the one on the right is what your CISO looks like when you tell them you just got ransomware. That's actually a heart attack. So how do you know that's a heart attack? That has its own unique pattern. It's a bad pattern, but it's still there. So what are the things to look for doing that basic attribution with a little a? The easiest things to look for are patterns in domains, hosting, IP addresses, certificate registrations, things like that. Those are not real good for doing attribution just because of all the shared hosting providers and multi-tenancy IPs and things like that. So things that are a little bit harder to look at are just themes, lures, and landing pages. If you see the same ones over and over again, a lot of times they're either like phishing kits that are distributed or phishing as a service providers and things like that. So most of my focus at work has been phishing kits, phishing as a service, things like that. So the hardest things to look for, and those are the things that really get you to that capital A attribution, are malware tool marks and targeting. And those take time and effort and really unique data sets to get those right. And almost nobody can get those data sets unless you're working with, you know, federal law enforcement or, you know, Interpol or some other international type of law enforcement. So why don't we do attribution for everything? It's really the lack of unique data. There's a lot of commodity malware out there. There's malware as a service and phishing as a service, so those things really kind of screw up your attribution if you're trying to do that. You might be able to say, hey, they're using this kit or they're using this malware, but because everybody is using the same thing, sometimes it's tough to find those patterns, or they're so ephemeral they just come and go, so you can't do it. So why do it at all? I mean, if it's so hard, why do it? Well, to defend your organization, you need to know what methods we're using to attack. Can we detect this? Do we have controls in place to prevent it? Does it map out to MITRE? And can we explain that attack to the C-suite? So all of those are a real good reason to do attribution, and most organizations at least can do that for their own data if you can do a little bit more threat hunting. So now comes the real story time here. So I Googled a picture of a SOC analyst after a year, and that's what came up. So I guess we'll go with that route. So my job, at least most of it, is looking at a stream of data that is as long as a CVS receipt. I typically look for phishing, so I'm looking in the URL feed. Basically the way it's presented is by volume. So stuff that comes up at the top of it is stuff that I look at first. I was looking around for phishing, and all of a sudden this popped up here. So dotted quad IP, secureserver.net, and I had no idea what secureserver.net was when I started. It turns out that that's GoDaddy's free hosting, and as everyone knows, no bad things have ever come out of GoDaddy. So that piqued my interest, so I fired up my VM and went to go take a look and see what it was, and lo and behold, I got redirected to Google. So I'm like, that's a little bit different. So start looking through who it's being sent to, because after that hash equals in the URL field is a plain text email address. And most of those ended up being in Brazil. So fire up the old VPN and pretend I'm in Brazil, and lo and behold, I do get the redirect there, and it's going to an Azure cloud hosted. As you can see, that descargar, that lines up with both the redirect and the landing page there. And so after I see that, just before I go to the landing page, I look at what the email said, and it's in Portuguese. Now, my Spanish is pretty good. My Portuguese is a lot harder to learn as I started learning it when I was tracking this activity here. But essentially, what it turns out is this one was spoofing something called an NFE. So that's a Nota Fiscal Electrónica. So in Brazil, anytime some type of a delivery of goods, something else like that, it comes with one of these for tax purposes. So right there, it's telling me it's targeting businesses, because individuals, like if you're getting stuff from Amazon or wherever else, you're not going to receive one of these. This is for business use only. So you can see that this is targeting businesses. This isn't just spillover from consumer type of targeting that happens to hit corporate mailboxes there. So, when it looked like phishing at first, well, it's not. It's actually ended up being malware. So we see that on the left, that's the landing page, and it downloads a zipped MSI file. In this case, it was only about 3 megs, so real easy to drop into the Sandbox and start taking a look at it. So, and what that did was downloaded a cab file. And this cab file, in a lot of open source as well, you can find these. It contained a bunch of different stuff, a legitimate application, encrypted injector, downloader, a config file, and a bunch of legitimate files. So it artificially inflated the size of that, and in this first campaign, they were very much adult-themed images and just a ton of them. So somebody had a collection that they decided to use maybe for padding this out, but it seems like they were trying to avoid some type of sandboxes that have limits on the size of files there. So, and what did it turn out to be? Well, it was a malware called Usaban. So, I don't know about you, but I had never heard of this before I started looking at it. But it has a really interesting delivery path. So it starts off with that, in this first campaign, started off with a zipped MSI file, and that downloaded a cab file. Sometimes it's another zip file that has a legitimate application, malicious DLL, sometimes some other junk. And then that malicious DLL will sideload and download the actual malicious executable binary and sideload that into the legitimate application. And lo and behold, you have this Usaban banking Trojan. The banking Trojan was a little unique for these Brazilian ones, because instead of the typical just keystroke capturing or things like that, or grabbing from forms, they actually put an overlay over the legitimate page and have the user enter in the information into that page. So in that case, most of these are slightly different than the traditional banking Trojan. So continuing to look for these now that I saw that first pattern, and lo and behold, this one was targeting Mexico now. Same thing, it had a redirect. It was Similar execution pattern to Usaban. It was also written in Delphi, which is unique to all of these, or a lot of these Brazilian malware. Not a lot of Delphi malware out there right now, and a lot of similarities in the structure there. So this is a recent campaign from this, just to show what it looked like. You had that landing page on secureserver.net, redirected to an Azure cloud hosting provider, and when run, had some interesting network traffic. The first line in there is the downloading of that additional infection file, and at the very bottom there is the C2 for it. So those vary quite a bit. The download of that malicious binary is typically a dotted quad address, which is most people hopefully block those, but that's out there. For execution and persistence, this one, or I should say this type of malware is actually using legitimate executable files. So they're signed, they're Microsoft, they're Adobe, things like that, but all of them have something in common, is that they have some type of DLL vulnerability, either DLL hijacking or injection or something else along those lines. So most of those will pass AV because they're a legitimate known file that is signed. Seen a few of them that have their certificates revoked, but for the most part, they're just older legitimate files. We already talked a little bit about the C2 there as well. So the Brazilian threat actors, there is a ton of development going on with these. In this case, we saw some more sandbox evasion techniques. They inflated the executable or MSI file to several hundred megabytes, and then had another file along with it that was much smaller and was actually that legitimate executable file renamed as something else, either XML or text or something else like that. So that was what was being injected into, and then the inflated file was the actual loader. And by doing that, most sandboxes, if the file size is too big, it just won't look at it. So it would look at the zip file, it would see that smaller legitimate file, it would run it and go, yeah, sure, let's go, and go past. They also did several different types of loaders with this, several different languages. Essentially, they had the typical MSI file, they had executables written in Delphi as loaders, and then for a day and a half, they actually had one written in Go. So that was kind of fun because everything was kind of in plain text and it was super easy to reverse. But that one didn't last long, I'm assuming, because it got caught too much. But there is so much development going on with these and so many changes that really keeps it interesting here. And it turns out that Delphi is the most popular, say, language for these, is because all of these Brazilian banking Trojans came from a single open source rat on GitHub that was written in Delphi. And they stole it and then just repurposed it and just keep recycling it in many different ways. Through some OSINT on Twitter, found an open directory that actually had the panel for this malware. And as you can see, there's just tons of victims of this, typically targeting, like I said, Brazil or Mexico. So as time is going on, I'm still looking at this, and all of a sudden start seeing some other stuff. So through that same secureserver.net delivery, we start seeing phishing as well. Phishing is all Brazilian language. I haven't seen any in Spanish so far. A lot of consumer stuff, Amazon Prime, Prime Video, a lot of Netflix, several different methods for, several different lures for that. They also did Facebook for one campaign only, so must not have made enough money on that. So that was kind of interesting to see that, and never saw it again. And then banks, and this is the one that we've probably seen the most of. So if you don't know, Banco do Brasil is the largest bank in Latin America. I think something like 80% of the population in Brazil banks with that. That one, and Banco Bradesco is another one, and a few others. Did see one for Banco Santander, which is actually in Spain. So that one was one that was an outlier. It was geofenced just to Spanish IP addresses. So Lo and behold, part of our tracking process for this is being able to track it over at least 3 months, being able to describe it in such a way that one of our other researchers can continue to track it, and a way to be able to track it if they change their TTPs suddenly to be able to find them again. So through all that, new player emerges. In this case, we've called it TA 2725. Proofpoint uses the TA designations there. Internally, I called it Grana, which in Portuguese, Spanish, and a lot of languages means like cash money. It's a financially motivated threat actor. They're using both malware and phishing, which was very unique. Most of the threat actors that we've seen pick one or the other. They aren't really doing both. They have some pretty consistent delivery. They had used the Usman Stealer last year. It's pretty much all Grana now, but there are a few outliers here and there, and have been doing a lot of phishing as well. So current TTPs for this threat actor are using that secureserver.net. Got a really good Splunk search looking for it, so every day I come in and see what they're doing there. And as you can see on the right side there, they just have a ton of different addresses. Some of them are running or dropping the same malware, different targeting. Some of them are using the same malware in different lures and things like that. So through all that, basically thinking that this is both a malware as a service provider and phishing as a service provider. They're the one-stop shop for cyber criminals. The Grana malware is actually already a malware as a service. I don't believe that this threat actor cluster is the one and only one. I think they're a reseller of that along with other things there. So in this case, they're using that same hosting. They're redirecting pretty much only to Microsoft Azure for the landing page for delivery. They're using multiple regions. I've seen Japan, I've seen Brazil, I've seen the Americas, all over the place. So they're not really picky about where on Azure, but they're pretty solid with just using Azure. The payloads right now are actually back to a small zipped MSI. So again, great job, guys. Really easy to sandbox. The failed redirects are typically going to Google or Bing, which is kind of interesting to be able to signature on a little bit. If you see that secureserver.net and it redirects to Google or Bing, it may just be this threat actor. And then phishing has been, lately has been just Banco Bradesco and a little bit of Netflix. So I'm thinking that Banco Bradesco either has a lower security than some of the others, or they found some other way to use those credentials a little more effectively. So, you know, we don't live in Brazil or Latin America, I don't think, so why should I really care? Well, a lot of the lures revolve around things that expats or citizens of Mexico or some of these other countries living abroad might use. In this case, they're talking about, I can't remember what it's called there. It's basically every month, any citizen of Mexico, wherever they live, has to pay a provisional tax to the Mexican government. So if they happen to be living in America, but they still have Mexican citizenship, every month they have to fill out this form. So their threat actors are using that as a lure to try to get more clicks on there. So if anyone in your organization or in your supply chain is a Mexican citizen, dual citizen, whatever, chances are they have to do something with this. And those two, malware, Usman and Grana, aren't the only actors or aren't the only malware in town. There are a ton of others, and they target all over the world. Astaroth started out as a Brazilian banking Trojan. Now that's more of a commodity malware. They target Brazil mostly still, but there are other targeting with those. Malcaz targets more Central and South America. Bizarro Banker, which was kind of a fun one to look at because there were a few campaigns early on with this threat actor for that one, actually uses a AutoHotkey or AutoIT loader with a bunch of decoy files that it downloads as well. And that targets worldwide. I mean, that one is Germany, Spain, Portugal, France, Italy. You know, if you have a supply chain, you probably have someone in your supply chain in those countries as well that are being targeted. And there's a couple other ones on there that I'm not real familiar with, but those are other strains of that. And then, like I said, with this development that's going on constantly with these, there are a lot of different variants of these different malware there. And so a lot of the time, there's a lot of consistency with this, and especially those redirects if you don't come to those pages from the correct GeoIP. And last week, I got kind of a fun one. Not sure if this was specifically meant for me, probably not, but instead of redirecting to one of the Google or Bing pages, it actually redirected to this lovely page, which is the one where you can order chocolate phallics to send to people that you don't like. All right, that's my story time there. Again, those are my social media there. There will likely be a blog about this on the Proofpoint blog. I've kind of been roped into writing one there. So if you want to check out, we do have other research there as well. And we have a cool podcast called Discarded where we talk about these threats and a lot of other stuff there. So thank you. And do we have questions? I'm being kind of blinded by the lights here too. Yes?
What's your favorite sandbox to automate phishing?
So it's what's my favorite sandbox? We actually are using a highly modified version of Cuckoo internally, but externally I've been playing around with Triage from, I think, Recorded Future just bought them out, but that one is quite a good one as well. Just understand that anything that you submit to these public sandboxes is going to be slurped up by those companies. Some of those are not in friendly countries. I know, can't remember which one off the top of my head, but is out of Russia. So just know where you're sending things and any run? Yeah. Yeah, it's Russian owned, so take that as you will with your own risk aversion or not. But yeah, those are probably the Triage is, I think, the one that I use most externally if I have to, but we have a really good internal sandbox and a lot of good devs there. Other questions? All right. Oh. Have I analyzed any of the command and control communications? Unfortunately, no. We don't have a great follow-on environment right now. So after the sandboxing, and frankly, a lot of times, especially with those public sandboxes, you can't give it a good exit node. So once it hits a certain point, it'll just stop because it knows it's not in the correct geolocation. But the ones that we have seen, I've had a few that have come through, are just kind of the same thing over and over again, just a general check-in. I haven't seen any commands coming back yet. All right, any others? All right, well, thank you very much.